God the Father, yes, Lord, I believe, who made the earth and all we see, yes, Lord, I believe. Do you believe in Jesus Christ? Yes, Lord, I believe. God's only Son, born of Mary, yes, Lord, I believe. I believe in God the Father, I believe in God the Son, I believe in the Spirit and the strength that makes us one. I believe that Mother Mary sits with Jesus at God's hand.
I'm pleased to welcome our keynote speaker who's representing the Covenant House, Tina Kelley. She wrote a book called Almost Home. It's right here. Tina Kelley was a reporter for the New York Times for a decade, where she was part of the Metro section team who won the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for their coverage in the public service category for their coverage of the September 11th attacks. She wrote 121 Portraits of Grief, short descriptions of the victims. At the time, she also wrote many stories involving powerless or voiceless people those struggles went against the grain of popular opinion. Those include the health problems of the Native American tribe living near a Superfund site, a high school student who challenged a proselytizing public school teacher and who received a death threat for his stance, a transgender vocational school principal in a rural town, and the lives of the children waiting to be adopted out of foster care. We really look forward to hearing what Ms. Kelley has to say about her work in the Covenant House.
My life wasn't easy. It wasn't at all. From foster care to the rapes to the miscarriages, everything, it wasn't easy.
Me and my mom, we seen things differently. I would see them one way and she would see them another way. She was into drugs.
My birth mother and my birth father were heavily into cocaine. They abandoned all three of us in a hotel when I was a year and a half.
My mom was fighting for custody. The judge had asked me to write a letter saying whether it was a good environment for my sister to be with my mom. I never wrote the letter. My mom had kicked me out because I made her lose custody of my sister.
My mom was a crackhead and she was a prostitute. My dad was nowhere to be found. I was by myself taking care of 3 kids. I was robbed of my childhood. I never had one.
Gave me the opportunity to keep studying. They pay for my college.
If you work the program that they give you, it works. But if you sit around and twiddle your thumbs and you don't do anything, you're not going to get anywhere.
I had everything in mind that I wanted to do, but until I actually got in Covenant House for them to lay it all out for me and help me start step from step and get to from crawling to walking and from point A to point B, Covenant House has done all that for me because I had no clue where to start to get my life back on track.
Basically, that's my goal, is finish college so I can have a better future.
I actually want to be a police officer. I can get a lot of stuff off the streets. I've been through the grime, the dust, everything, and I feel like if I was there to help them, that it wouldn't be there.
I really, I don't know how to say thank you. You cannot find an opportunity like this, nowhere. It's hard to find.
When you do street outreach, you've got to dial it way back. So for me, success is the fact that a kid speaks to us. So just getting them to open up, getting them to trust us, and then they come into this building and we get them to tell us their life stories. And we get them to tell us their hopes and ambitions and their dreams. That is a success. Now, anything after that is just great.
I wanted to take these young people who in some ways are invisible and need to be invisible and make them visible to others. Kevin, my co-author, always talks about how it's hard to love long distance and it's hard to hate close up. And if through our book we could make it so that the reader would understand what homeless young people are like and what they go through, then we would have succeeded. So when I first heard about Covenant House, I was probably a 15-year-old just going to high school in suburban New Jersey. I worked for Covenant House as a volunteer right out of college. I lived in New York and I wanted to work for an organization that my company supported. I was working at Metropolitan Life Foundation, giving away money from a corporate foundation, and one of our grantees was Covenant House. So I went there, I did intake interviews, I did job interviews, like fake job interviews to help the kids get used to applying for jobs. We started a literary magazine where young people would put in to a shoebox their poems, their rap lyrics, any kind of illustrations they wanted in a magazine, and we would Xerox it and distribute it around the shelter. And that made me realize one of the other things that Kevin says frequently, which is that the least interesting thing about the kids at Covenant House is the fact that they're homeless. They're talented, they're funny, they're ambitious, and there's really nothing that's going to stop them unless it's the dangers of living on the streets. When they come into our shelter, a lot of them are very beaten down. They've been told that they're worthless. They are not healthy. A third of them need to see a doctor right away. About 87% of them have not finished their high school degree, so we work with them to get them their GEDs or actually to return to their home high schools if it's possible. We ask them what it is that they need. If they can safely return home or go with other family members, that's the ideal outcome for them, if it is safe for them to do so. In many cases, it's not. They come from abuse. They come from people who don't accept them for who they are. As I was saying earlier, the thing that surprised me most in doing the reporting for the book was that very few people, barely anyone, was there from having made a bad decision. They were there because their mother died and their father went to jail, so they went to live with their grandma, and the grandmother had a stroke. It wasn't that they had made bad choices. They were there kind of through circumstances, not through consequences. Yes?
What are some examples of some long-term health issues they may be suffering from? Is it some psychological and some serious disease of any kind?
It runs the spectrum. There was a young person in Los Angeles that I considered putting in the book who was going through chemotherapy for Hodgkin's disease. Mostly, I would say it's basic poverty-related issues. Dental care is a huge need. A lot need help with asthma or dealing with diabetes. And mental health is a giant issue. At first, when I saw the numbers, I thought, I don't know if we want to go public with how prevalent depression and anxiety are among the kids that we work with. But then I looked at the flip side, like who would be out living on the streets or couch surfing and not knowing where their next place to sleep was? Who could go through that without being anxious? Who could go through that and know that their family relationships were broken and not be depressed? It's like the rational person's reaction to those circumstances is to have a mental health issue.
Do you think any of them are there as a consequence of having a pre-existing mental health condition that the family or parents
Yeah.
might deal with?
Yeah, that happens as well. It's hard to know which comes first, but oftentimes I think the number was in the low 90s of kids who need 90% who need some sort of counseling. So we provide that at our shelters. We provide legal advice. We provide, of course, room and board and counseling for jobs. So I'd like to tell you the story of the first young person who I interviewed in person. When I first started doing the reporting for the book, we spent a lot of time writing about a young man who had committed suicide the year before in the Atlantic City shelter. We have 27 shelters throughout the U.S., Canada, and Latin America, and I visited a bunch of them in New Jersey when I first started to work full-time for Covenant House. And when I was down in the Atlantic City shelter, I heard quite a bit about this young man who had a lot of issues that were gang-related and was getting out of the gang, getting his tattoos removed. And I talked to pretty much everyone who knew him. He had committed suicide a year earlier in the shelter, and he left this huge presence. All the kids in the shelter talked about him, all the caregivers, all the social workers. So I really wanted to find out more about him. And that was probably the hardest reporting that I did because he wasn't there to talk to. I couldn't see that he'd turned out okay because he hadn't. And it was a tragic There was no way to look at it other than as a tragedy. The first young person I talked to who was living and breathing and that I could interview was Benjamin in Texas. And he's 6'6" and can bench press 495 pounds. He's gigantic and stunning and smiling. And he has, if you look closely after a while of interviewing him, you notice that his hands are very scarred. When he was 18 months old, his mother, who had mental health issues, was hearing voices and put his hands in scalding water. So he had to go to the hospital for 4 months. She went to jail for 4 months. He had, numerous surgeries and eventually went back to live with his parents, but the abuse continued. When he was 9, he was taken out of the family permanently and was in foster care until he turned 18. He was in approximately 30 different placements throughout his childhood. And I looked at him and it's like, how did you survive? He said there was no, falling star from the universe that told me any message. I just did what I had to do. He was a hard worker. He was always the one that people called to help with moving. He's the one who could take your refrigerator down the stairs by himself to show off. He was pretty funny that way. He was a little bit of a show off, but he wanted to be physically strong because he didn't want to ever witness anyone be abused by a strong person who was abusing their power the way his parents had done. So he became a football star. He went in and out of homelessness, but eventually there was this moment where he was about to get kicked out of Covenant House for fighting and cussing. And his favorite counselor, who I was able to meet and interview, just said, I got this, and went upstairs and talked to Benjamin as he was packing his bags and getting ready to leave Covenant House. And he said to the counselor, why are you treating me like this? You're treating me the way my parents did. And that wounded the counselor to the core because he had treated him with unconditional love and respect. That's the gist of how Covenant House approaches the young people that we work with. If you're a counselor and you don't have unconditional love and respect, you're gone. It's kind of our special sauce compared to other social service agencies. And so when Benjamin said to Mr. Todd, "You're just like my parents," Mr. Todd just got in his grill and said, "No, don't you dare say that. I love you." And Benjamin just broke down and cried for about an hour at that point. And he had this sort of cathartic moment because no one had really said that to him and meant it and, promised to be there unconditionally. So, he stayed in Covenant House and then went to college, but then he got kicked out of college because he had anger management issues, which anyone would after the kind of beatings he went through. And then was able to work his way back to a different college that suited him better. And when I interviewed him, he was working as a special needs counselor for kids who are at risk in a junior high in rural Texas. So I got to walk around with him, and all these little kids come up to his elbow, but they were sort of gathering around him, and he was very charismatic, but he also had a really good radar, and he could tell who was having troubles. So I walked through the hallways with him, and he's like, "That kid over there, when he's not with a group of kids, I'm going to go talk to him because the way he's walking isn't right." He was very hunched up, and it turned out the kid was feeling suicidal over a girl. And Benjamin went to the guidance office and hooked the kid up with special services and counseling because he knew that what the kid was going through and knew that the kid needed it right immediately. And at one point, he held up his hands and he said, these hands are a blessing. Even though I'm hiding them all the time, even now, they're a blessing to me because the kids know that life for me hasn't been no crystal stair. They know that I'm real and that I speak from having gone through something hugely painful, so the kids can open up to me in a way that I can help them. So that was kind of a moment of grace in my mind, that he could look at his circumstances and use it for good. And that came to be a theme throughout the reporting of the book. Everyone I talked to was able to say in some level that, not that they were glad that they'd been through all the crises and catastrophes that they'd been through, but that they were glad that they ended up being who they are now. And those circumstances created who they are now, and they wanted to, every last kid that I talked to for the book wanted to do something to help others afterwards. It was pretty amazing. So I want to also, are there other questions? Because I can talk forever, but I want to make sure that you don't walk away with questions unanswered. Yes?
Well, the immigrants or the children of immigrants is very vulnerable, doesn't find it welcoming presence. What is the policy with regard to that? Is there some...
We have an open door policy. We don't turn anybody into ICE. We just give, we meet them where they are and try to get them the services that they need. And it happens pretty frequently. When we did the pictures for the book, which were kind of amazing. As I was saying before I started, I was saying out front, it was a very stressful book to write. The first 2 chapters ended up on the cutting room floor because the parents of the young man who killed himself didn't want him in the book. And the young woman who we spoke to, who was a trafficking victim, stopped returning phone calls. She just didn't want her story out there anymore. So we had to respect both of those positions and scramble to find somebody before deadline. So another way that things blew up on us was that we'd had beautiful pictures taken of the 6 young people or 5 of the 6 young people who are in the book, the chapters. We had a photographer who traveled with us to Alaska and New Orleans and made these beautiful portraits. And 2 weeks before deadline, the lawyers came in and said, no, you can't have their real names. You can't have their real faces because there's a danger that either the publisher or Covenant House or the kids themselves will be sued over what's in the book. So we have to get rid of all the photos, but we still needed photos. And our photographer was really annoyed at that point and quit. So I had to find a new photographer, and we did these photos that are in the book in the course of a day. The photographer was Timothy Ivey. He's in here who spoke about how his name is Joseph, the one who was homeless because he wouldn't tell social services that his mother could raise his sister. I spoke to him as well. We did all these photos in a day. And they're just they're beautiful. Timothy Ivey was able to get the faces and the spirit of the kids in a very short period of time. And this young woman was from Haiti and had issues with immigration, and we were helping her through that. So the covenant is you tell us what you need and what you want to do, what dreams you want to pursue. As long as you work towards those dreams and meet your part of the covenant, our covenant with you is that we will do anything possible to make that happen. So another issue that we run across very frequently, and that isn't in the book because, it's in the book, but not as completely, is the issue of human trafficking. I said the kids want to be invisible. It's not just because they don't want to be teased for being homeless. They want to be invisible because if people recognize them as being homeless and vulnerable, they're much more likely to exploit them, and oftentimes that's sexually. We did a study 2 years ago in our New York City shelter that showed that almost a quarter of the young people that we interviewed had either been sexually trafficked or had been forced to do survival sex, which is having sex in exchange for something of value, usually a safe place to stay or food. So there was commercial sexual exploitation it was 23% of the kids that we see in that shelter. We see 3,000 kids a year in that shelter. So if you extrapolate that out, it's more than 700 kids. If you'd asked our counselors before that study came out, how many trafficking victims do you see? They would have said maybe 2 or 3. Because they don't come in with their hands raised saying, hi, I'm a trafficking victim. There's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of trust that has to be built before a youngster will disclose that. And there's a huge amount of trauma. So since the book came out, we were able to get a $1 million grant to open a safe house outside of New York City, specifically for that population. We also did another study in New Orleans that found almost exactly the same breakdown of kids who've been involved in commercial sexual exploitation. And we have plans for 5 other cities to do more of those studies. It's a very squishy topic when it comes to facts and figures. You hear estimates of how many young people are trafficked or what the average age is at which they begin trafficking, and nothing really smells right to me as a journalist. All those figures are disputed among there's different factions. There are people who want all prostitution abolished. There are people who are fighting trafficking like we are. And then there are people who say, people have a right to be prostitutes as adults. And everyone's fighting over everybody else's figures. But we have, in our capacity of working with large numbers of homeless kids, we have the capacity, and we're using it to show how vulnerable they are to being exploited. And those figures are probably low because, as one of the young people said to the interviewer, you're lucky. I like you and I will tell you this, but if I didn't like you, I wouldn't tell you at all. It really takes a long amount of developing of trust for them to even talk about it. And we were able to find, after the first trafficking victim dropped out of the book, we were able to find one in Vancouver who was willing to talk about it kind of at the last minute. It felt like the last minute because I had to fly out to Vancouver and do a whole chapter. And she was able to talk about her experiences. And what stuck with me from speaking with her was how she left at one point. She had a friend who said, look, I can get you a nice apartment down in Gastown, which is the nice, trendy part of Vancouver, with stainless steel appliances and a health club. And all you have to do is earn $1,000 a night. It's not that hard. So come with me. And Muriel did. And when Kevin was reading that chapter, he called me up, and I remember where I was sitting because he's like, we can't say that. We can't have her make that choice. I'm like, dude, that's what happens. We're here to tell the truth. And the truth of it is that it's very hard for young people who are involved in trafficking to escape because of the drugs, the glamour. I mean, they had her addicted to drugs to keep her prostituting herself. And if she left her pimp, she would have to leave her drugs as well. And it's a very common occurrence that the people will go back to the street and then back to safety and back to the street and back to safety. And that happens with general homelessness as well, but particularly with trafficking. But someone said to her as she was leaving that night, you're better than that. You deserve better than that. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Who said that to you? And she's like, oh, I don't know. Maybe it was this one or that one. Or she rattled off like 3 or 4 different counselors. And I talked to all of them. And I said, do you remember saying that to Muriel? And they said, well, I might have said it, but I don't really remember who really said it. And we realized that it was kind of the agency saying that to her, the agency saying that you are valuable, you deserve the best future possible. And eventually she came back because of that one sentence. She described it, kind of like a lifeline. So that's what we try to do with the young people we work with. We have the closest one here is in Philadelphia. We have a shelter on Germantown Avenue. We also have a transitional living facility where that John Bon Jovi helped us build. So a lot of people got their pictures taken with the sexiest man alive, not me though. It's a wonderful new facility where the kids who've gotten through the crisis part of their homelessness and are getting more established, once they have a job, they can apply to the transitional living program. They put their salary, a third of their salary or a half of their salary, into an escrow fund, which they consider rent. It's part of the program. To get them used to budgeting. They also learn to cook and clean and do life skills. In some cases, they learn to drive and how to apply for insurance and how to save for first and last month's rent, all the things that ideally parents would be doing, but our agency does in the absence of parents. And for some of them, when they leave, they have $10,000 in their bank accounts so that they can get their first and last month's rent and get a security deposit, get a car if need be, and really get a foothold into independent living. So we're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for groups to come and help at the shelter. A lot of the young people have never had a birthday cake, which blew me away. That, if they grew up in foster care, when Benjamin was in foster care, or actually no, it was his family did this to him. It was his birthday. The parents took the whole family to Chuck E. Cheese and bought them hamburgers, but they made him eat a cheese sandwich because he was kind of the ostracized child. So he never had a birthday cake. A lot of the kids we work with haven't had that. So we have volunteers who will come and bring a birthday cake for the kids who have birthdays that month and make posters like happy birthday, Joey, happy birthday, Kanisha. And they'll come up and say, can I have that poster? Because they've never had something like that makes them feel special. We also have volunteers do pumpkin carving or cookie making or Easter egg hunts, which I thought sounded crazy because, I mean, the people are 17 to 21. Like, who wants these big, tall kids running around looking for Easter eggs? But they hadn't had it. They didn't get to have their childhoods. And so it's a very joyful thing that the volunteers can do. They also always need clean socks and toiletries and meals. And yes?
Do a lot of the older kids participate?
Yeah, it is. It's, Halloween is a big deal. In my town, I live in Maplewood, New Jersey. Some of the moms from our elementary school put together a prom because that's another thing a lot of them miss in high school if they're not in high school with their peers. So they just had a huge party and got a collection of prom dresses and tuxedos and made them feel special for at least one night. So, other questions? Yes?
Is there a minimum or maximum age range for eligibility?
If they're in most states, except for Louisiana and Alaska, we can take younger kids, but in most states it's 17 to 21 or 2. We don't kick them out on their 21st birthday because it's tacky. If they're doing well, some of them will stay, up to a year longer until they're ready. And some of them come back for aftercare services. I work with I'm a mentor to a 26-year-old, and she still comes back for aftercare services. So people often ask what they get kicked out for. We try not to kick them out for anything because one of our principles is sanctuary, and we want it to be safe. If they are making it unsafe for other kids, then we might ask them to leave for a short period and give them referrals to other shelters. But in general, I mean, Polly, who's the first chapter of the book, went in and out of Covenant House 11 times before it actually stuck. And that was another one that Kevin said to me, we can't say that in the book. I'm like, we have to, it's the truth. But it's also, there's a beauty in it, in that we do welcome them back and forgive over and over again if, for all the times that they leave, because they are there voluntarily. No one assigns them or sentences them to our shelter.
You might have answered this earlier, but what is the primary source of outside funding?
Oh, it's private. It's almost entirely private. I think in the high 90s. %wise. We rely on, we have a big fundraising letter that goes out very frequently. We also people run the Philadelphia Marathon and raise money that way through our home team. We also have sleep outs where colleges will say we'll do a sleep out overnight with cardboard boxes and get sponsors. I've done that 3 times, and even though I wrote the book on homelessness, I learned something new every time I do that because it is scary, it's cold, it's miserable, it's uncomfortable, you feel like garbage 2 days later. But for these kids, that's their daily reality in some cases. So, Sherry?
I just have a question because I'm a fan of bringing people cakes. So if I wanted to do that for the local Philadelphia, do I just call them and just say I would like to twice a month bring 2 cakes for 2 students?
Yeah. It's Covenant House, Pennsylvania. They are online. They're in the phone book. I can give you my card, and I could even introduce you to. Okay, great. If you email me, I'll introduce you personally to the executive director there. So, who was our lawyer for the book, and so.
I feel like birthdays are very special.
Yeah.
People have never had a cake. It's like,
Other questions? I'd like to, I guess, do I close yet? I don't know. I'd like to close with what I think is the best paragraph in the book. Can I do this without killing myself? It was written not by me, not by Kevin, but by Cory Booker, who was the mayor of Newark at the time. And in the course of writing the book, it gets overwhelming. to deal with these really, really, really sad stories over and over again. And I was trying to sort of figure out how to cheer myself up, how to keep my sanity, how to, not let the sadness that I was taking in become toxic. And, I ran across that in 20 years of journalism as well. There are ways to keep yourself sane, including exercise and having a really good cry every once in a while, like in broadcast news, if you saw that movie. But this paragraph kind of does it for me, and I'd like to end on this. This is from the foreword by Cory Booker. City Hall in Newark is 3 blocks from our Washington Avenue shelter, and he has been a very, very good friend to our agency in New Jersey. He writes, "I've learned that real heroes usually aren't the kind of people you read about in newspapers or see on TV. Real heroes are usually the ones concerned with the least glamorous of things. In fact, I've come to believe strongly that the most heroic or biggest thing we can do in any day is a small act of kindness, decency, or love." Here's the best sentence, the whole book. "What frustrates me is that so often we allow our inability to do the big things to undermine our determination to do the small things, those acts of kindness, decency, and love that in their aggregate over days, weeks, and years make for powerful change." So we talk about creating a movement to fight homelessness among young people. There's many, many ways to do that. The whole last chapter of the book is how you can help. We still are writing about these issues, not in book form, but in blog form. Kevin does a blog on Huffington Post. I'm working on one now that talks about new legislation that's passing to make sure that foster kids get the choice of staying in their home school or getting to the school of their choice as quickly as possible so that they don't fall behind in their education. Each time a foster child changes schools because of a changed placement, they lose 6 months of education. And that is probably why when Benjamin came to us at 18, having aged out of foster care, he was reading at a 3rd grade level. So there's a law that recently passed in California that is a foster children's Bill of Rights for education. And there's also one that's pending now. It passed the U.S. Senate. It is waiting for the House. It's part of the No Child Left Behind package. And it would require nationally that foster kids have that right to the most expedited school transfers or no transfers at all, if at all possible. So I urge you to look into that. I urge you to visit the Covenant House website because we talk about different ways that people can join in and help. And I urge you to think about sleeping out. We've had schools that do that and that organize a sleep out and raise the money for the local Covenant House. And it's very, very, very much of a learning experience. So, any other questions? I will have the book for sale outside. They're usually $16.95, but for students and at school presentations, they're $10. And the holidays are coming up. They make wonderful presents. Thank you.
Do you believe in God the Father? Yes, Lord, I believe. Who made the earth and all we see? Yes, Lord, I believe. Do you believe in Jesus Christ? Yes, Lord, I believe. God's only Son, born of Mary. Yes, Lord, I believe.